Side player going to be spotted by the Boombot over in tree. Prowler's chasing forward into the smoke as the Divide tries to hold backside. Quick headshot comes in. Easy going to be taken down for Forsaken, dropping off the top of heaven with the Odin in hand. Comes up with 4.
Defensive flooding is an incredibly important and dynamic element of defending in Valorant. Flooding adds dynamism to a defensive plan and enables the defense to capitalize on the attacker's points of weakness, so it is a vital part of the push and pull of macro play, skirmishes, and team fighting in general. I believe the biggest ridge between higher and mid-level play to be dynamism and the capacity to quickly challenge contested space with solid timing and trading. Core to this notion is the defender's flood. Thus, this video will hopefully serve as a useful tool for teams or players looking for a way to improve their defense. We'll look at what a flood is, when they're a strong strategy, and how to stage a successful flood, as well as some of the attacker's counters to them to hopefully make more dynamic and opportunistic play accessible. Before looking at floods specifically, we should first build a solid understanding of some foundational concepts around space on the map. We'll begin with how we can categorize different forms of control over space and lines of sight. This will be particularly important for the macro side of setting up floods and for execution later on as well. For this, we can distinguish between ownership, occupation, and control of space. Own space is simply space through which we can freely move. We know we can freely move through space if our opponent does not own a line connected directly to it. Let's consider, for example, a sense A site. If I have a player that's sitting back site, holding onto the line into A main or occupying it by jiggling it, then I know that the opponent does not own the line into the site itself, and therefore that I can move freely through the bomb site while I'm defending. Let's enhance this example by considering an Omen is holding a one-way in deep A main. If he's pushed off his one-way and forced into the site, he has no means on his own of knowing whether the opponent owns the line into the site itself, and therefore cannot necessarily move fluidly through it. He doesn't own it. But if he has a support player, or perhaps even less coercively a killjoy turret backside, he can understand the timing at which the enemy takes that line into sight, and therefore when he needs to be smoking, and whether or not he needs to help someone. This means that you can still own the bomb site even after being forced off of A main. This teaches us that ownership doesn't always have to look the same. I can just as well own the A bomb site by having a player sitting backside, or maybe in heaven from a very predictable angle, just occupying the line and telling me whether someone comes through it, as I can for instance using a smoke to enable an off angle hold. I might want to do this if I want to commit a lot of resources towards tree to hold onto that area for instance, but I don't want my enemy getting a line into backside during that time. Ownership and an understanding of where threats are is, naturally, incredibly important for both sides. It's particularly important for setting up defensive floods because the timing window for flood setup is very precise. Thus, consistent fluid movement and a system of preemption is key to a strong defense. Building on ownership, we can use the term occupation to refer to lines or space with a player on them. From our Ascent example, then, we can say that having a player occupying that backside space enables us to preempt an exec and understand what degree of threat is in main and how much we own on site. Without that support player, once Omen is pushed off his line, he no longer has the ability to gauge threats in main and therefore cannot understand when rotations are necessary or when smoke's necessary. From this, we can draw two important conclusions about occupation. The first is that occupation is our primary means of informing our ownership of our own space. The deeper the lines that I hold, or have occupation over, the more space I know that I can move through freely, of course to the detriment of my ability to move through it quickly. The second is that occupation is the starting point of what we can call control over space. Control, then, we can define as the reinforcement of any given instance of occupation. The degree of control a team exercises over an area or line varies depending on how robustly they exercise it and how many resources they're willing to give to that specific line. At the core of control as a sustainable practice is positioning. Using techniques like double holds, double swings, up downs, and counter swings, we reinforce initial occupation with more coercive force and trading power. Control often involves utility as well. Stall utility is an easy example, but we can also use utility to reset burst challenges with more coercive force. For example, consider attacking on Lotus. Once the attacker has claimed C main for an ult orb, they might pre-aim an Omen blind from Mound. This way, if the defender is stupid enough to dry swing, the stack simply kills. But if the multi-hold is dismantled by, say, a breach blind, the challenge is reset using counter utility. Thus, control encompasses the varying ways that we can stack coercive pressure on top of occupation of space. From these concepts, we can draw the foundations of a strong flood. As the defense, we aim to maintain consistent ownership of our own space to enable fast rotation to stage into a flood, or better yet, a hard hold where we can. We use solid occupation as the defense to preempt execs from the attacker, allowing us to rotate into space for challenge on time. As far as timing goes, our goal as the defense is to flood into space the attacker occupies or recently did occupy before they establish control over our ability to challenge. This is what differentiates a flood from a mere retake. With all of this as our foundation, we now have the necessary tools and language to properly explore floods and how we can execute them consistently in matches. An important precursor to the application of floods is the question of when to use them in the first place. It's fairly commonly thought that flood retakes are just the next best thing if you can't achieve an entrenched hard anchor, but there are certainly instances in which flood retakes or anchor style floods are a stronger strategy altogether. One of the major situations where we might want to flood retake a site is where the offense has massively more resources to exec than we do to anchor against or to reset them. This can be because of an ult deficit, because of differences in agent compositions, or numbers in the space in question on the map at the time. By way of example, let's consider this round from Masters Madrid between Genji and Loud.
Hello.
Yeah.
Loud's coming to my site, guys.
As we can see, despite this being Loud's eco round, QCK has his Euro ult, which can confirm Kaunzi's concuss. This poses a considerable threat to any entrenched player on site, especially given that Lakia is more or less alone and easy to isolate right now. For this reason, Lakia plays near the smoke exit of his rotators to outspace the Euro ult and enable him to be a part of the broader fight against main in a flood from Meteor.
He does have an Odin. Opportunity to potentially slow things down here, but not noted just yet by QCK. Now he will be.
From here, even though Lakia eats the stun, the flash over from Munchkin enables the double face through the smoke after the expiration of Loud's burst utility.
He willingly walks into it. Oh, that's just outstanding from Meteor.
It's easy to envision an attempt at the hard anchor from Lakia, for example, leading to QCK getting hold of an Odin and being able to prevent any smoke exits, but playing Lakia close to the chest enabled this clean flood during Loud's early scaling. From what we've just watched, we can even expand this further to say, even when we're not at a resource disadvantage, flooding is a strong strategy when we want to avoid impermanent forms of exec utility and challenge after their expiration, when clearance becomes unstable. This comes with its risks. It means granting our opponents some of the initial space they want to scale into, so we need a means of disrupting that scaling when it turns into raw contact and uncovered clearance. A final reason we might resort to flooding, flood retaking in particular, concerns macro play. Simply put, if we want to stack resources on one side of the map as the defense, or utilize big, deathball-y skirmishes, flooding where resources are weakest after winning out in the stack is often a good move. This round between Carmine Corp and Fnatic from the EMEA kickoff can serve as a good example.
But into this round, you're looking at Nari, you're looking at Martine. The rifles.
At round start, this thorough control of mid enables Tomasi to occupy this deep line into B main with a safe retreat to call rotators.
Right, that's the punchline of this joke.
Look how far back Fnatic are. Like, genuinely look at where the players outside of that B site are. They are still sat so far back, just waiting for KC to do something, because that's what they have been doing. And the fact is, Martine did make a move.
As Carmine Corp retreat into a more trade-oriented death ball, Tomasi relaxes his angle and centralizes near the team, just playing to note any contact into B while Fnatic are leading their resources around mid and A.
I kind of like that they almost tried to bait that it was narrate there, but there was still going to be Martine close. Oh my god! Look at the damage, look at Durka!
That boombot saved his life.
Yeah, literally saved his life. Fortunately for him, he can get a heal. Leo's going to invest that, but again, this is... Look at this hunting squad. They're sending out after Alpha.
Tomasi retreats even more safely and, aware of potential timing, just plays to contain any potential Fnatic lurker into his space.
He's going to be feeling so uncomfortable. He felt the timing just right, though. Credit to Alpha for that internal clock, right? Feeling out that there was something going on here, didn't like it.
This enables the fight group to clear and still retain ownership of their spawn for a quick rotation to B with no risk to set up a flood.
Maybe the right choice here, but is it the right timing? Tomasi's going to check this. It is when Durka's on the money, but they know now, the plan's been seen.
Finally, as the clock ticks down, Carmine Corp have systematically narrowed down Fnatic's exec options and retained ownership of their spawn enough to quickly rotate into B, still with time enough to flood heaven and set up an engulfing retake while Fnatic rushes onto site to plant.
The Boaster needs to go big here. So does Leo. KC closing the gap! It's going to be on Leo, a 1v3, this is just unthinkable again! Shin finds it!
These examples hopefully help to demonstrate the kinds of situations where we're best placed to employ floods. More to the point, we now have to consider how to set up and execute a successful flood. For the sake of this video, there are just a few key considerations we need to put into setting up a successful flood. The application of some of these concepts, as we will see, will vary slightly between anchor floods, where we flood into space still occupied by an ally, as opposed to flood retakes. On the macro side of things, the main goal we need to consider in setup is just getting rotations in at the right time. We can use solid preemption as a start for this. Simply put, the deeper lines we occupy, the more time we buy ourselves to react to enemy rotations and bring rotations in. A further useful tool for enabling floods on a macro level is establishing what we can call floater players in the mid-round. Floaters are players whose position is non-committal and broadly centralized on the map, allowing them to rotate quickly and reactively. We can only establish floater players when we have a comprehensive and deep network of ownership on the map, so they don't have to entrench themselves to assist anyone that might get hit unreactively. An enlightening, if aged, example of both of these principles can be found in Evil Genius's Fracture play from 2023. We can use this anti-eco against DRX to demonstrate.
Jogamo pushing forward. Zest going to be able to spot him there. Just play back. Hovering around the door. 3 members from the side of EG. Currently over towards this A side of the map. And Stacks, as well as Buzz, just going to go on a little bit of a lurk through the sewer across to that arcade side.
After stacking resources heavily for A main, we can see EG start to set up a 4-pronged preemption system using Boostio's bolstered utility on B, Jorgamo's deep position, and Ethan's relaxed spot into dish from main. This enables Calm, with a dart in hand for the flood, to react to DRX's B lean quickly.
Gobbling up the orbs where he possibly can.
Yeah, and this is encouraging for DRX that they're able to find some value in the early parts of these rounds to get these orbs into Stacks' hands.
Noticeably, to improve preemption towards dish, because that's where LOS is shallowest for EG, Calm does float towards that side of the map to spot from Rafter, or potentially provide a dart if noise is cut for a long time.
Excuse me, the Stinger got him down nice and easy.
Manages to find that kill. Doesn't draw any further attention over towards A. Calm had rotated back over, but now slow approach, gets ready to come in here from DRX. 33 seconds remaining on the clock to get ready to pull the trigger. The smoke's going to be going down. Boostio just spraying through, managing to find Stacks.
As DRX's exec comes in, EG used stall utility and a dart for spam to prevent DRX setting up a comprehensive post plant quickly and pressure them into a bad plant spot, all of which enables the actual flood from Ethan and Jorgamo to come in.
Rather thinking that it was going to be for more default behind the boxes. Now Swørn stop the push forward. Buzz swinging around, managing to find one, but the cleanup is swift as Calm will claim 2, Jogamo the last.
As well as demonstrating how to set up floater players, this round also shows us a key use to floods besides site retakes themselves, that being the claiming of space which the offense grants to commit their weight to an exec. Using floods to set up a retake puts pressure on the offense who lose their leverage space and cannot react to the retake option reliably, and, as we see here, forces them to take a fight which will inevitably swing the way of the patient defender. The key thing to remember in all this is the basic concept of timing that we want to follow when flooding. The idea is to aggress when the attacker's exec is unstable during scaling and clearance. As long as this is followed, the idea of where you're flooding is very malleable based on the round and what you want to achieve with it. With this in mind, we can think about how we can ensure that we have a strong sense of timing going into a flood on a round-specific basis. This is where some microplay elements become relevant. Our sense of timing will typically, save for when we have an incredibly adept read on our opponent's rate of scaling, come from what I call triggers. This simply embodies the ways for us to assess the stage of the attacker's exec, and thus when we time our challenge, whatever form that might take. An obvious enough one is just a player. Having a player stationed in an area which the offense will clear late into their scaling will alert us to when the earlier space will be more vacant or unstable. Ascent's B site is a great example of this because of the separation of the site proper from the exit from main, but this can be applied to many other sites plenty easily as well. As an example, we can use this round between 100 Thieves and G2 on split.
Now Cryo anchors B, so they're just trying to make it as easy as possible for Cryo. It's going to be sending.
As G2's fast exec starts to roll in, we can see Boostio playing a relaxed backside position where he'll be cleared late. As Icy passed through the site, Boostio widens his position out to respond to the smoke exit of the rest of the team behind him and take the fight with Icy as delayed as possible.
Training for these 100 Thieves players though. Boostio.
Once Boostio makes contact with Icy and G2 start to lean into the exec, his position is reinforced by 100 Thieves flood utility and his own Dizzy, allowing a swift and effective exec into front A.
Some of the decaying damage kicking in. Flurry of bullets, enough to do the job.
In these floods, which we can term anchor-style floods because we never fully surrender occupation of the target area, the threat of the uncleared trigger player creates an opportunity for challenge, as well as giving a clear understanding of when and where the enemy's exec is occurring. Returning to the idea of avoiding exec utility, we can also use this principle as a trigger. We can base our understanding of when our challenge is safe on the cues from the offense's exec. Thus, where staging a flood, we are doubly benefited by draining out burst utility, both to give us a window of instability after its expiration, and to give us a sense of timing to begin our challenge. We can harness this through what I term inertia, which refers to any way that we might halt the offense's movement. Using inertia, we force the offense to declare their exec because extra force, utility, is needed to attack our space, which gives us the sound cues we need for our triggers. Think again of that round, for instance, between Loud and Gen G, and how Meteor used the timing of the Breach Stun and the Yoru ult to exit the smoke. We can see another example of this from FPX and Team Heretics' series in Masters Shanghai.
This time, FPX wisely not choosing to fight mid.
They're looking to play retake on A, but maybe try to hit the plant as it goes down. How close they are to this.
As we can see here, even though FPX have rotators in place and plenty of time to challenge Heretics, their lack of preemption and inertia makes it difficult to gauge the rate of Heretics' scaling. Heretics thus managed to set up a comprehensive exec and challenge the CT exits of FPX effectively while planting the spike, and FPX completely lose their opportunity to capitalize.
But life takes care of him. Rian's on the swing, and again, another flash of Dink is beautiful! As Rian gets a second!
From all this, we can hopefully build a solid foundation to our flood setup by enabling our rotations to come in quickly and giving ourselves a strong sense of timing coming in. We can also see just how much variance there can be with how we set up and execute our defensive floods and formations. Using players, sentinel utility, or even the offense's utility as triggers is a prime example of this. Now that we can comfortably approach getting set up for our flood, the only thing left to do is to actually do it. Till now, we've used the term flood to describe a very broad set of actions, including grouped retakes, anchor assists, and even raw solo challenges in some instances, but at this stage we need to make things a little bit more specific. For this reason, for most of our remaining examples, we'll engage with how the setup and triggers affect the flood's execution. A core principle of flood form is to execute into space which is both engaged by the trigger and which the offense is unsafely scaling into at the time. The aim is to isolate the space we want to flood based on these criteria. When performing an anchor-style flood, we want to execute into space our opponent is presently rushing through. We can think of this almost as a counter-exec during the offense's initial one, where we front-load out of a smoke or choke point which is readily engaged with the desired space. As an example, let's look at this round between Leviathan and 100 Thieves on Sunset.
And there's no trips to stop them in their tracks, but also set on this right side where EU has been scaling on that part the whole time. Pain shells now spreading out the attack. Wingman coming in for the defuse to push forward. That's it! Only one left! Instantly Leviathan comes in with the util.
This is a very clear example of a util dump into the defined area of front side B, enabling the double swing from the flooding player's pillar and market, which 100 Thieves had not established wide enough control to dismantle. We can see how Osbos's nade and Mazzino's stun and blind disrupt 100 Thieves scaling through front sight, and the kill trip prevents their scaling too close to market, which would disrupt the swing through. Isolating space in an anchor style flood is all about engaging the space our trigger player is holding, while enabling friendlies to assist in the same space mid-exec. We can look at this round between PaperX and T1 as an example. Notice how as T1's exec starts, PaperX used the mid-sight smoke to enable Forsaken's exit from heaven. This enables them to deal with backside against T1's initial scaling before engaging with the player scaling through later.
Prowler's chasing forward into the smoke. Mai tries to hold backside. Quick headshot comes in. Easy going to be taken down. Forsaken dropping off the top of heaven with the out in hand. Comes up with 4.
As we can see, part of Anchor Floods is about uniting flooding players with triggers and separating space into neat chunks to do this before engaging with broader, connected areas. Thinking back to our principles of control, it becomes clear that isolating space in this way is partly down to variance in the positions we challenge from. For example, having a trigger player on site can enable double swings with smoke exits. This round between DRX and Team Secret demonstrates this quite well.
We don't have our ranks yet. We haven't done for our placement. So I'm just going to change my answer just to mess around with Victoria and say that I think this is going to be a quick game. DRX is going to take this really quickly. Bane is going to start things off with an initial kill onto Jeremy. A hop over and he just clicks away. Stacks now with a bit of a double too.
We can notice how Bane's position is complemented by the swings through Team Secret smoke on lower verticality, giving DRX a lot of variance to win trade fights and prevent multi-frags from players coming in later. It's important also to ensure we don't bite off more than we can chew to maintain a strong challenge. Floods do not always have to engage site proper in any immediate sense. Having dominant ownership of space preliminary to a retake is a huge advantage on its own. Think back to Carmine Corp's flood against Fnatic on Split. The flood itself primarily engaged B Heaven, but the pressure the Fnatic players were under planting the spike once Carmine Corp owned Heaven proved insurmountable, even in an economically advantaged round. Once we're happy with our ability to isolate space for the execution of our flood, we can start playing around with varying our triggers and flood locations for the same basic space. For example, we can compare 100 Thieves' flood on Split against G2 with one loud performed against a similar exec.
Everything was red. It's a lot that could happen right here now with 50 seconds left. QCK shows it, body checks the dog, breaks it down. Now he's one away from a large hold of his own. Onto Heaven control.
Likely fearing Zekan's rocket, Loud, even with Kalendzine in a similar spot to where we saw Boostio earlier, choose to be respectful and just use Breach utility to mark space and stall to pull resources. During this time, as Sen continue their exec and find nothing on site, QCK and Sadak take ramp, isolating Sen's players on site for a retake with no off-site leverage.
For a late look, he might be too late. There's a kill, here's a showstopper, finally online, rocket round towards the back. Sassy is dropped like a fly. Tens has to do the most now. He stands his ground and wins his one out. Kawazine falling out. Sadak though,
It's been slowed
position
down.
to Molly to push him out of position. Zekan, Zelsis is here. Finally, arriving to the party though, Util in his hand. Sadak adjusts it and watching for it. Tens now 1v2, the double face is there. Terrific together, it's 2 years.
When executing, we can isolate different areas of space in all sorts of ways. For example, we can use info denial tools like PaperX did to separate front and backside areas, or cut out certain angles by using mollies to prevent swings during our flood. It's good to treat floods as a counter exec, almost like we're playing offense for a little bit during the round, and think about isolating space to scale into it like we do in a regular exec. Now, the only question left to ask is how to avoid getting flooded on when attacking. We can treat anti-flood play mainly as a matter of managing space using the principles from the start of this video. As the offense, if we suspect a flood, scaling in a controlled manner and focusing on full control of the space we're using will enable us to catch or prevent flood attempts. Thinking of this, we just have to employ principles of control while scaling. This is because at the heart of flooding is the abuse by the defense of gaps left by an offense seeking to clear a lot of deep angles quickly to prevent an anchor. As the offense, if we know that that flood is coming, our main tool to stave it off is not leaving any of those gaps to exploit. An initial instinct we might commonly resort to when discussing this kind of thing is stall utility. We might molly our smoke as we're scaling, for instance, to prevent the weaker stage of our exec from being capitalized on. This allows us to isolate potential trigger players by cutting off reinforcements. This is a good start. However, particularly when it comes to deep clearing sites, it is unsustainable to expect a molly to do all of the work in preventing a flood, given how long execs can sometimes take. This is where positioning elements come into play. To explore this, let's use a couple examples. A recent example is this round between Gen G and G2 at Masters Shanghai.
Last time it was an early lockdown, but I don't think they're going to get it in place in time.
Doesn't seem like in Meteor. He's just looking for a timing. He pushes up. He's able to find balance. Confirms that the spike is here, but they already knew that. Push across, Odin spraying through. Munchkin able to avoid that, but Showstopper set and shut down immediately. Icy able to find the kill. A little bit of damage to help out Leave. Trying to come online. Finds himself two. That's going to be Lakia. Last one just now rotating over.
When Icy's initial scaling is halted by Meteor's utility, notice how as he slows, the rest of G2 use that time to flatten out a long front sight, making it difficult for Gen G to force a fight into the united front. Considering this in terms of control, we can say that the slight variances in angles that the stack of G2 players occupied allowed them to hold the flood attempt once they understood that was Gen G's plan. Thus, the round ended before the spike was even planted. This round between Carmine Corp and Fnatic also demonstrates this safe, flattened out form of scaling and its application, even if not per se in an anti-flood setting.
Who predicted that? Who isn't French?
I think Steel did. I genuinely think Steel actually predicted KC to do well.
He doesn't know anything about it.
No, that's true, that's true. That's true. And oh god, Alpha's dead. Alpha was dead 30 seconds ago, but he just didn't know it yet. Plant's gonna come in. KC. This looks like the pistol might be theirs.
Once Command Corp start their site scaling, notice how their initial utility is only used to enable them to flatten out against pillar to isolate positions like Alpha's at backside. By enabling their own double swings, they completely corner Alpha where he can't safely swing. We can see this even just looking at his POV before he dies. This is complemented by Narrate's passing through Heaven to Pillar, which checks Raptor and Hell to ensure that this flat scaling is secure from front side challenge. Using Omen Blind and Fade Grab back Pillar ensures that Common Corp's double swing threat is stronger at the start of their exec by incapacitating the potential support player threatening a counter swing from Fnatic. While this round didn't concern a flood necessarily, we can very clearly see how Common Corp had counter plans for any flood attempt by remaining in a uniform group in varying positions. It's because Common Corp had recognized that B was Fnatic's weaker side of the map that they were able to take things slowly and methodically like this. Without that information, they'd have no insurance that Fnatic couldn't create their own swing chances during their slow scaling. The same is true of the round between G2 and Gen G that we saw earlier, demonstrating the main point that our strongest tool against floods is simply having information enough to know to expect them so that we can put anti-strats into effect. With all that said, we've now covered all the basic foundations of defensive floods, from execution as the defense to anti as the offense. Flooding is a great way to expand the limits of our own play past the ordinary bounds of dry execs and retakes. Hopefully this video proves useful as a tool for enabling teams and players looking to play more dynamically to do just that. But in any case, thank you very much for watching and have a lovely day.